Hello everyone. Today I'm going to be discussing with you about production process selection and the major decisions that factory managers will have to take when they are planning the production process for the product that they are manufacturing. When it comes to process selection, the factory managers need to really have a foresight on planning and deciding the kind of product that they are manufacturing. Based on the product that they are manufacturing, they need to very wisely decide and design the process layout for the right type of production that needs to go into for manufacturing goods and services. Some of the things that they need to very seriously think about is capacity planning. When you're building a factory and then deciding to set up a layout, you need to be very clear about whether you're going to go in for a product layout or for a process layout. And while we do that, we also need to plan in advance for the capacity increase that is going to take place over the years. A factory is not just built for utilization for 3 months, 3 months, or for 6 months, or for a year. A factory and a process layout is something that is planned and designed, and a lot of investment goes into it for a long-term utilization that can be for a period of 3 to 5 years. So when we plan for a production layout, we must make sure that we are planning much in advance for the increase in capacity that's going to take place over the years according to our demand estimates. Secondly, we need to look at the layout of facilities where we are going to assign and apportion appropriate places for machinery, tools, equipments, and movement of materials, movement of people, and manpower and tools which are placed in different sections. We need to think about that as well, and what is the movement, what is the right movement of the goods, and what direction is the flow of the goods going to take place, where machinery has to be fixated. All of those are very thoughtful and pertinent decisions that we would have to make. Thirdly, we need to look at equipment, capital equipment or labor intensive, whether it's going to be a capital intensive unit where you will have more of machinery and equipment in the production process, or it's going to be a labor oriented or a labor intensive unit where you will have more manpower, less of machinery, but more of people working on the value addition and in the production process. And fourth, we need to look at the design of the work system to make sure that the the production facility is very ergonomically designed. It's designed in a manner where the balance of machinery and the balance of people is very appropriate. It is an environment where workers are going to come, factory workers are going to come and work in shifts, and they're going to be working there for 8 hours and more. So it needs to be a very conducive kind of an environment with adequate lighting, adequate ventilation, adequate facility for space, arrangements for sitting. All of those need to be taken into consideration. And next, we need to think about the changes that are going to happen or occur in our organization, which is going to affect the product and the production process and the facility, for which the factory also has to be tuned to cater to those needs. One could be a new product development. What if we are going to be launching a new product or a service in the coming future? So we need to ask this question whether the existing product layout or whether existing layout of production or manufacturing layout is going to enable us to cater to that new product that we're going to manufacture. Secondly, what about technological changes? What if there is an automation or a new type of machinery or a group of machinery that is going to be brought into the organization? So how are we going to manage that? And third, it could be competitive pressures. A lot of times it could be uh, a decision that the organization may want to take to see how to fight a competitor in terms of, or giving back to the competitor in terms of how they are innovating. So, like a tit for a tat, now they do something very different to beat us in competition, and we also have to rise up to that occasion and then be able to match them over. So, a lot of intensive thought goes into uh, the, the the design and the setting up of the production and the process layer. Continuing further, when we are looking at process selection and system design, two important aspects become very important. One is the process selection. what kind of a process are we going to look at in terms of work design, in terms of how the layout is going to be configured, or in terms of how facilities and equipment are going to be planned accordingly. Next, we're going to look at the capacity planning, forecasting the demand for goods or manufacturing that is going to take place this year, or the manufacturing that we need to be prepared to enhance in the coming year, or the new product and service design. It could be with a design change for a product or a service, or maybe a layout change that can take place for the existing product that we're manufacturing, or it could be a new layout that we want to lay for a new product that we are thinking of. And then definitely technological change is definitely going to see. So our layout must be flexible enough to accommodate these changes that are going to take place, in the current state, or changes that are going to occur. We need to forecast those changes that are going to take place, and then be able to see that a manufacturing layout has is prepared to handle all of those different aspects as such. What are the different types of process types? So basically, for a manufacturer, when they're thinking about what kind of a process type to go for, they basically four types of processes that they could think of. One is a job shop. Job shop is a very typically a very small kind of a workplace, a manufacturing unit, where goods that are manufactured are in very lesser quantity, and they manufacture in lesser volume, and they use a lot of general equipment, or we call these a general purpose machinery, but involves high variety of work, which is a very highly specialized kind of a work. It is not a routine kind of a job or a problem that you are going to take up, or it's not going to be a routine kind of a task that you're going to take up. These are experts who are going to be who are working on the shop floor, who are well equipped with the variety of products that they have to manufacture, or the kind of decisions that they will have to take, or the kind of work that is required to be involved. That's why it requires high variety, because you never know what kind of a work is going to come up in a job shop. A very good example would be that of a mechanic shop. An automobile mechanic is actually sitting in a shop with all the equipment, with all the tools, with everything that he has to repair a car or a two wheeler. Any car or a two wheeler that comes with a different kind of a problem. So a car owner may bring his car and say, "I'm having a problem because the car is stopping at every point. And it starts off and then it goes a little distance and then it immediately stops." So he could complain of a problem like that. Secondly, you could have a two-wheeler rider who brings his bike and says, "From morning I'm experiencing leakage of fuel from the fuel tank." So both these, if you look at it, both these are two different problems, wherein the mechanic must be in a position to fully understand what exactly is the nature of the work. One is a car, the other is a two-wheeler. The car has a problem of starting and stopping. The two-wheeler has a problem of fuel leakage. So he needs to use his expertise, and he will use his general tools that he has. Basically, understands what is the nature of the problem and goes ahead trying to solve it. So it's a high variety job, and the task may not be the same. Like, for example, on that particular day, if he's going to have about five car owners who bring their cars, not all the five car owners are going to come and say that they have a problem of starting and stopping. It was just that one owner who came in the morning. The other three may have different kind of problems with their car, and that's why a job shop is handles very lesser task. It could be a small unit, it could be a small mechanic shop, or it could be a veterinary office or a clinic. It could be a small clinic of a doctor. It could be those typically small shops that we see where they have general purpose, general equipment machines with which they apply their expertise, and then they try to handle and sort things out. Secondly, batch processing is where a certain quantity of goods are done. These are done in batches, wherein a manufacturer could have different products that he manufactures, product A, B, C, D, and E. And each of these products are going to be manufactured in the same facility. So product A, he takes up and says, "I need to produce about 1 lakh units." So he goes ahead in a batch of producing that product A in 1 lakh units. Product B, he may say, looking at his inventory, he may say, "I just need around 30,000 units." So he may just go on to manufacture the next batch. But A, B, C, and D, irrespective of the good that he manufactures in whatever quantity, it's all going to be manufactured in the same place. So that's a batch. So you are manufacturing it in batches where each batch is has the same kind of work that needs to be done. It has the same kind of workers who use similar kind of expertise, similar kind of tools, material, everything remains the same. Fourth is a repetitive or an assembly kind of a work where the job is of a very semi-continuous basis, and these are high volume and standardized items where it goes on an assembly line manufacturing where all the equipment is placed in a straight line format in a layout, and then from one work section to another work section the items are going to move. It's going to be happening in a very repetitive or a very remote controlled fashion where it's going to move from one to another workstation in a very seamless manner. Fourth would be a continuous processing where very high volume and absolutely no variety. Continuous processing is where from morning to evening you go ahead with the same kind of work, and then the volume is going to be very high, and it's got very little variety. So there's very minimal change that you need to make in terms of changing the layout or maybe changing some of the specifications there while you're making the product. So these are four broad options from where manufacturers will have to think about planning and deciding what would be the appropriate type of process that needs to be used to manufacture these goods. The fifth would be the project. Project was basically for a non-routine kind of a job, where generally anything of a one-time basis or a turnkey project or anything where you're doing it for the first time, where things will have to be brought to that particular place. Equipment, man, machinery, every other input factor needs to be brought to that particular place, and you're building, building a product, or you're building a site, or you're building, putting up things together in one place. And that's a project which generally does not happen in a factory kind of a setting. Depends on the nature of the job. If it's a construction, you go to a construction site and you do it. And if it's like a project which involves a software engineer sitting and working on a product or testing and then trying to deliver a good, then it could happen in an office where with a set of computers and software and with engineers, you could go ahead and start doing that work. So basically a variety from where you can choose, depending on, first of all, you need to know what is the nature of your product. Depending on the product, depending on the demand, depending on uh, what is the nature of manufacturing that needs to happen, whether it's a product based or whether it's service oriented, capital intensive, or whether it's labor intensive, depending on that, go ahead and make these decisions. So before we choose a layout, these are some top of the mind questions that factory owners will have to ask, right? Questions such as variety of products. Does your product manufacturing involve, does your product involve a high variety or a low variety? Depending on that, you make a choice. If it's a high variety, you go in for a job shop. If it's a low variety, you go in for a continuous processing. So how much of flexibility? So which means how much of variety is required. Next, we go into flexibility. How flexible is the process? Is it high flexibility or is it low flexibility? Depending on that, you make a decision between a job shop and whether it's going to be high flexibility is job shop. Low flexibility is continuous processing. And in between would be your batch and your assembly line manufacturing. So what's the volume? High volume, low volume. If it's low volume, then you go for a job shop. If it's moderate volume, you go for a batch production. But if it's very high volume, then you go for continuous or repetitive manufacturing. So what's the use of technology? If it's going to be high level technology, you go in for continuous or continuous processing, where everything is very so technologically updated, sophisticated with machinery, and then everything goes on. You press a button and then the production line starts, and then the manufacturing will go on. If it's low technology, it's going to be a job shop. Where you have in a job shop, you typically have an expert who knows the job, how to do it, and has very general purpose equipment and tools and goes ahead sorting and handling. Is it a high design or a low design? If it's high design, then it goes into high variety, it goes into a job shop. And if it's low design, then you typically go in for a continuous. So you need to ask this question to the product that you are manufacturing, to understand the nature of the product. So what is the type, what's the volume? Is the volume high or volume low? Depending on that, you make this decision. So that's how you need to ask these questions so that you are fully able to understand what is the product that you are manufacturing. And depending on the nature of the product, you make a decision as such, and then you go ahead and then you make that. So those are options that you have. And this particular slide gives you the option of job variety. What is the type of process you could choose from a job shop to a batch production to a repetitive or a continuous. And we're looking at whether job variety is very high or very low, or process flexibility is very high or very low, or what is the unit cost of manufacturing, is it very high or very low, and then volume of output, is it very high or very low, and accordingly you make a decision, right? If everything is very high and the volume of output is very low, then you settle in for a job shop. If everything is very low but the volume of output is very high, you need to manufacture a large quantity to keep the cost of production low so that you're able to sell the good at a lower price in the market, and you go in for a continuous process as such, right? So this is an example of a product process layout, right? So that gives you a good understanding of if your product falls into a high variety or a low variety, where do you fall? Now, if it's a high variety, as I told you, I gave you the example of a mechanic or an emergency room or a doctor's clinic, right? Where you have different types of products that is being brought, and you need to use your expertise and your general purpose tools to see how you can handle it. Whereas a batch or a classroom lecture is a typical number, it's a fixated number. And for example, when you take a classroom lecture, you have 60 students in a class, so you handle that particular batch, right? Repetitive is assembly line or automatic car wash, wherein cars keep coming and the kind of work that you do is very similar. You just need to wash cars, right? So it's just like that. Or assembly line manufacturing, where you have the same type of job being done in a very continuous fashion or a manner. And then you have continuous, which is oil refinery, water purification, or large volume uh, uh, goods that are manufactured. FMCG commodities will fall into low variety, but with large volume that needs to be manufactured. So these are some examples to give you an understanding of how we need to have the right balance of the product and the process. And this is also another example that talks to you about you know being volume being one criteria, and whether uh, you know any output, whether the output is very high or very low, and whether there's what's the degree of standardization and flexibility in terms of product and product that you manufacture. So these are the four types of process layouts that are very essential for a production student to understand, where we are able to make the right decision of knowing what's the right product that we're going to manufacture. And depending on the product, we make a decision of choosing the right process and make the right investment, configure the right product, and then go ahead and make sure that your product gives you that sort of a benefit for the return gives you that return on investment for the investment that you are making in terms of planning and designing a proper product, a proper facility layout, and a proper production layout in your factory.